The entire restaurant fell silent when she said it. "Man, don't dare me." Her voice was steady. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes locked onto the most dangerous man in the room. Tony the Blade. Marcello, head of the Italian Mafia in New York, sat across from her, smirking like he owned the world. And technically he did own half of it. But this waitress, she wasn't impressed. She grabbed his expensive cigar from the ashtray and crushed it under her shoe. "You disrespect my diner. You disrespect me. I don't care who you are." His bodyguards reached for their guns. The entire room froze. Customers held their breath. Forks stopped mid-air. Even the cook in the back peeked through the kitchen window. This was it. The moment where everything could go terribly wrong. Tony's face darkened. His jaw clenched. His eyes turned cold, the kind of cold that had ended lives before. But then someone in the corner booth stood up, quiet. Calm, wearing a simple black jacket, Steven Seagal. Nobody had noticed him until now. He'd been sitting there the whole time, drinking coffee, watching everything unfold. And what he did next changed everything. Not just for that waitress, but for the entire neighborhood. Because Steven Seagal doesn't just watch injustice happen. He stops it. And tonight, in this small Brooklyn diner, he was about to remind everyone what real power looks like. Not the kind that threatens, not the kind that bullies, but the kind that protects. This is a story about courage, about dignity, about what happens when ordinary people refuse to back down, and what happens when someone like Steven Seagal has their back. So buckle up, because what you're about to witness is unforgettable. It was a cold Thursday evening in Brooklyn. Rosa's Diner had been standing on that corner for 37 years, small, humble, red vinyl booths, checkered floors, the smell of fresh coffee and apple pie hanging in the air. Rosa Martinez, the owner and head waitress, had raised 3 kids working double shifts in that place. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. She didn't have a fancy degree or powerful connections. But she had something money couldn't buy: dignity. Tonight, like every night, she wiped down tables, refilled sugar dispensers, hummed old songs her mother taught her back in Puerto Rico. The diner was her sanctuary, her pride, her legacy. She'd bought it with every penny she'd saved from 20 years of waiting tables at other restaurants. Every scratch on the counter told a story. Every crack in the tile was a memory. This place was more than a business. It was her heart. Then the door swung open. The bell above it chimed, but the sound felt different this time. Heavier, darker. 6 men walked in, black suits, slicked back hair, cold eyes that scanned the room like predators sizing up prey. They didn't ask for a table, they took one. The leader sat in the center booth, mid-50s. Scarred knuckles, gold rings on every finger that caught the light. Tony, the Blade Marcello. Everyone in Brooklyn knew his name. Most feared it. Some whispered it like a curse. He ran everything: real estate, casinos, protection rackets, underground gambling, judges, cops, politicians, all in his pocket. If you crossed Tony Marcello, you disappeared. Not metaphorically, literally. But Rosa didn't watch the news. She didn't follow crime reports. She didn't pay attention to neighborhood gossip. She just saw 6 rude men who walked in like they owned the place, didn't greet anyone, and didn't say, "Please," or "Thank you." Rosa grabbed her notepad and walked over, professional as always. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I get you?" Tony didn't even look at her. He was busy checking his phone, scrolling through messages, completely dismissive. "Espresso, double shot, and make it fast. I don't have time for slow service." His men snickered. One of them whispered something in Italian, and they all laughed. Rosa nodded calmly, her face unchanged, calming right up. She turned and walked to the kitchen, her footsteps steady. But as she poured the espresso, she heard a lighter click. Then she smelled it: cigar smoke. Rosa turned around and saw one of the bodyguards leaning back, puffing on a thick Cuban cigar, blowing smoke toward the ceiling, inside her diner. Against the rules. Against the health code. Against every ounce of common decency. There was a sign on the wall, clear as day: Usmakrem. Rosa took a deep breath. She placed the espresso cups on a tray and walked back out. She set the tray down gently in front of Tony. Then she looked at the bodyguard with the cigar. "Sir, no smoking indoors." "There's a sign right there." She pointed to the wall. The bodyguard looked at Tony. Tony looked at Rosa. And then Tony did something that made Rosa's blood run cold. He smiled, not a friendly smile. A predator's smile. He reached over, took the cigar from his bodyguard's mouth, and brought it to his own lips. Then he exhaled a thick cloud of smoke directly into Rosa's face. "I didn't see a sign. Maybe you should get better eyes, old lady." The diner went silent. A couple in the corner booth exchanged nervous glances. The cook peeked through the kitchen window, his face tight with worry. An elderly man reading a newspaper slowly folded it and placed it on the table, sensing trouble. But Rosa didn't flinch. She stood there, smoke still lingering in front of her face, her eyes locked on Tony's. Put it out. Now. Tony leaned back in his seat, spreading his arms across the booth like a king on his throne. He took another long drag from the cigar, letting the smoke curl around his face before exhaling it lazily toward the ceiling. You got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't pay rent, lady. He tapped ash onto the clean floor Rosa had just mopped an hour ago. You know who I am. I know you're a customer acting like you own the place. Tony's smile widened. His gold teeth caught the fluorescent light. I do own the place. I own this block. I own the building next door. I own the laundromat across the street. And soon, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I'll own this dump too. His bodyguards chuckled. One of them cracked his knuckles. Another adjusted his jacket, revealing the outline of a shoulder holster. Rosa felt her heart pounding, but she didn't let it show on her face. She dealt with difficult customers before. Drunk customers, angry customers. Customers who thought waitresses were beneath them. But this was different. This man wasn't just rude, he was dangerous. Still, Rosa had made a promise to herself a long time ago, never let anyone disrespect her in her own home, and this diner. This was her home. Tony flicked more ash onto the floor. Deliberately this time, his eyes never leaving hers. What are you going to do about it, huh? Call the cops? He laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. Sweetheart, half the cops in this precinct are on my payroll. You call them, they'll thank me for the heads up and tell you to mind your business. The bodyguards laughed harder now, emboldened by their boss's confidence. One of them leaned over to another and muttered, She's got no idea who she's messing with. Rosa's hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anger, poor, righteous anger. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, lost too many nights of sleep keeping this place alive, and she'd be damned if some gangster in an expensive suit was going to walk all over her dignity. So she did something no one expected. She reached down, grabbed the lit cigar from the ashtray on the table, and crushed it under her shoe. The sound of it grinding into the floor echoed through the silent diner. Man, her voice was steady, unshaken, defiant. For a moment nobody moved. Tony's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. The air in the room turned ice cold. The bodyguards shot to their feet, chairs scraping loudly against the floor, jackets opened. Hands moved toward concealed weapons. The couple in the corner grabbed their coats and rushed out the door without paying. The elderly man slid lower in his booth, pretending to be invisible. The cook disappeared into the back, likely calling someone, anyone. But Rosa stood her ground. She didn't move, didn't apologize, didn't beg. She just stared at Tony Marcello like he was nothing more than a schoolyard bully. And in that moment, she was the most powerful person in the room. Tony slowly rose from his seat, towering over her. His voice was low, dripping with venom. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, lady. Maybe, Rosa replied, but it's my life. And my diner. And in here you follow my rules. Tony's face flushed red, his fists clenched at his sides. One of the bodyguards whispered urgently, Boss, want us to? Tony raised a single finger, silencing him. He pulled out his phone, never taking his eyes off Rosa. He dialed a number, waited, then spoke in a cold, clipped tone.
Yeah, it's me.
That diner on 5th and Lenox? Shut it down. Health violations. Fire code. I don't care what you use. Just close it by tomorrow. He hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked at Rosa one last time. You got 48 hours before this place is boarded up. Hope your pride was worth it. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, and threw it on the table, not as payment, but as an insult. Then he turned toward the door, his men following behind him like a pack of wolves. But he didn't make it outside, because someone stepped into his path. A man in the corner booth, quiet, calm, unnoticed until now, stood up, tall, broad shoulders, black jacket, long dark hair tied back, Steven Seagal. Tony stopped in his tracks. The bodyguards froze, unsure whether to move forward or wait for orders. Steven didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, blocking the exit, his presence filling the entire space. Tony sized him up, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. You got a problem, friend. Steven's voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried weight. Yeah, I do. Tony's smile returned, but this time it was thinner, more cautious. You know who you're talking to? Steven nodded slowly. I know exactly who I'm talking to. Tony Marcello runs the East Coast operation, launders money through real estate, bribes half the NYPD, thinks fear is the same as respect. The bodyguards tensed. Hands drifted toward their jackets. Tony's smile disappeared completely. And you are someone who's tired of watching bullies pick on good people. Tony's eyes darkened. His jaw clenched. Big words. Let's see if you can back them up. He snapped his fingers, sharp and commanding. 2 bodyguards moved toward Steven immediately, stepping around Tony to handle the situation. Drop a like if you think Steven's about to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. The first bodyguard was big 6'4", easily 250 pounds. He swung hard, aiming for Steven's jaw. Steven sidestepped, smooth, effortless, like he'd seen it coming a mile away. He redirected the punch with a subtle wrist movement, sending the bodyguard's own momentum straight into the second guard's jaw. Crack. Both men stumbled backward, colliding into a table. Coffee cups crashed to the floor. The third bodyguard pulled a knife from his belt, a tactical blade, black handle, serrated edge. He lunged forward, aiming for Steven's ribs. Steven moved faster. A wrist lock. Clean. Precise. The kind you only learn after decades of training. The knife clattered to the floor. Then a palm strike to the chest, controlled, but powerful enough to send the man sprawling backward into a booth. Within 10 seconds, all 3 bodyguards were on the ground, groaning, gasping for air. The diner was completely silent. Rosa stood frozen behind the counter, tray still in her hands, eyes wide with disbelief. Tony stared at Steven, his face pale, his confidence shattered. Who the hell are you? Steven didn't answer. He just walked past Tony, calm as ever, and sat back down in his corner booth. He picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, and looked at Rosa. Your coffee's getting cold, Rosa. Tony's phone rang. He fumbled to pull it out, his hands shaking slightly now. What? The voice on the other end was frantic, muffled but audible in the silence. Boss, we got a problem. That guy you just tried to mess with, that's Steven Seagal. Tony's face went white. The actor? No, the operator. Ex-CIA consultant. Trained half the Special Forces units in hand-to-hand combat. He's got connections in Washington, Moscow, Tokyo. Boss, you don't touch him. Nobody touches him. Tony's hand trembled as he lowered the phone. He stared at Steven, who was calmly sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. Tony looked at Rosa, then back at Steven, then at his bodyguards struggling to stand. His voice came out quieter now, less certain. This isn't over. Steven set his coffee cup down gently. He looked up at Tony with calm, unwavering eyes. Yes, it is. Tony's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're going to walk out of here. Steven interrupted, his voice still quiet but sharp as a blade. You're going to cancel that call, and you're never coming back. Tony tried to regain some composure, some control. Or what? Steven stood up one more time, slowly, deliberately. He took a step toward Tony, closing the distance between them. Or I make one call, and by tomorrow morning, every deal you've got, every dirty cop, every bought judge, every laundered dollar, it all comes crashing down. Tony's jaw clenched. His fists balled at his sides. But he knew. He knew Steven wasn't bluffing. He turned without another word and walked toward the door. His bodyguards limped after him, bruised and humiliated. The door swung shut behind them. The bell chimed. And just like that, the storm was over. The diner exhaled. Rosa sat down in the nearest booth, her legs suddenly weak, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She looked at Steven, her voice barely a whisper. Why did you help me? Steven smiled gently, his eyes kind. Because you didn't need help. You already won. I just made sure he knew it. Comment RAS PT if you believe courage doesn't need a crowd. 2 days later, Rosa was closing up the diner. It was late, almost midnight. The streets were quiet. The overhead lights flickered as she wiped down the last table. She was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. Ever since that night with Tony Marcello, she'd barely slept. Every car that passed made her jump. Every shadow outside the window made her heart race. She kept replaying it in her mind, the cigar, the threats, Steven stepping in. Part of her felt proud. She'd stood her ground. She hadn't backed down. But another part of her was terrified. Men like Tony Marcello didn't forget. They didn't forgive. And even though Steven had scared him off that night, Rosa knew it might not be over. She locked the cash register, turned off the coffee machine, and grabbed her coat. Then she saw it, headlights, pulling up outside a black SUV, tinted windows, engine running. Rosa's stomach dropped. He's back. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, ready to dial 911. The SUV door opened, but it wasn't Tony. It was a woman, mid-40s. Tailored gray suit, leather briefcase, confident stride. Professional but warm, she walked up to the diner door and knocked gently. Rosa hesitated, then unlocked it. Ms. Martinez. Yes. The woman extended her hand with a kind smile. My name is Angela Reeves. I represent the Seagal Foundation. Rosa blinked, confused. The what? Angela stepped inside, setting her briefcase on a nearby table. Steven Seagal's nonprofit organization. We support small business owners who've been targeted by organized crime or corruption. Rosa's mind was spinning. She didn't even know Steven had a foundation. Angela opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. We've been monitoring Tony Marcello's activities for some time now. What happened here 2 nights ago caught our attention. She handed Rosa a folder. Would like to help you. Rosa opened the folder slowly, her hands still shaking. Inside were legal documents. Financial statements. Property records. What is this? Angela sat down across from her, her voice gentle but direct. Would like to pay off your mortgage. Fully. No strings attached. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. I don't understand. Why would you do that? Because Mr. Seagal believes people like you, honest, brave, hardworking, are the backbone of this country, and he's tired of watching them get crushed by people like Tony Marcello. Tears welled up in Rosa's eyes. Angela continued. We're also offering you a grant to renovate the diner. New equipment, updated interior, whatever you need. It's all covered. Rosa couldn't speak. She just stared at the papers in her hands, her vision blurring with tears. Angela reached across the table and gently touched her hand. You stood up for yourself when most people would have stayed silent. That takes courage, and courage deserves to be rewarded. Rosa wiped her eyes, her voice cracking. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just sign here. Angela handed her a pen. Rosa's hand trembled as she signed the documents, barely able to believe what was happening. But Angela wasn't finished. She pulled out another folder, thicker this time, with official-looking stamps and seals. There's one other thing, Angela said, her tone more serious now. Rosa looked up. We've been building a case against Tony Marcello for 6 months. Federal racketeering charges, extortion, money laundering, witness intimidation. Angela opened the folder and showed Rosa photographs, surveillance shots of Tony, transaction records, intercepted communications. Your testimony, what happened that night. It's the final piece we needed. Rosa's eyes widened. Testimony. He threatened you. Attempted extortion. Assault by proxy through his bodyguards. And it's all on your diner's security camera. Rosa hadn't even thought about the camera. It was old, tucked in the corner near the register. She'd installed it years ago and barely remembered it was there. We already have the footage. Angela continued. You don't have to testify in person if you don't want to. But your recording, combined with everything else we have, it's the nail in his coffin. Rosa covered her mouth, overwhelmed. He's going to jail. Angela nodded. For a very long time. The FBI is raiding his operations tomorrow morning. By this time next week, Tony Marcello won't be a threat to you or anyone else in this neighborhood. Rosa sat back in her chair, tears streaming down her face now, not from fear, but from relief, from hope, from the realization that standing up for herself hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Angela stood up, closing her briefcase. You did good, Rosa. Really good. She handed Rosa a business's card. If you need anything at all, call me. Rosa took the card, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Angela smiled. Thanks, Steven. He's the one who made this happen. Type JUST if you believe karma is real. 3 months later, Rosa's diner reopened. The entire neighborhood came out for the celebration. Families lined up down the block. Kids ran around with balloons. Local musicians played on the corner. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the air. The diner looked completely transformed. Brand new booths, deep red vinyl, pristine and spotless. Polished checkerboard floors that gleamed under the lights. A bigger kitchen with state-of-the-art equipment. New windows that let the sunlight pour in. But the soul of the place remained the same. The photos on the walls, Rosa's family, her late husband, her children growing up. The old jukebox in the corner, still playing Motown classics. The same warmth and love that had always made it home. A new sign hung outside, hand-painted in beautiful, Rosa's Diner Est, 1989. Rebuilt with pride 2026. Rosa stood behind the counter, wearing her favorite apron, tears of joy in her eyes as she greeted old customers and new faces alike. People hugged her, thanked her, told her how proud they were. The mayor even stopped by, shaking her hand and praising her courage. But Rosa wasn't thinking about any of that. She was scanning the crowd, looking for one face in particular. Then the door opened, and there he was, Steven Seagal, quiet as always, no fanfare, no bodyguards. Just a simple black jacket and that calm, steady presence. Rosa nearly dropped the coffee pot in her hands. Mr. Seagal, I didn't know you were coming. Steven smiled gently. Wouldn't miss it. He walked through the crowd, nodding politely to people who recognized him but didn't make a big scene. He sat down in the same corner booth where he'd sat that night 3 months ago. The same spot where everything had changed. Rosa grabbed a menu and walked over, her heart pounding with gratitude. Same order as last time. Steven looked up at her, his eyes kind, always. Rosa poured him a cup of coffee, fresh, hot, perfect, and set it down gently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rosa sat down across from him, something she never would have done with a customer before. But Steven wasn't just a customer. He was the reason she still had a diner, the reason she still had hope. I never got to thank you, Rosa said softly. Not really. Steven shook his head. You don't need to. You stood up for yourself. I just made sure you didn't stand alone. But why me? Rosa's voice cracked slightly. You didn't even know me. You could have just walked away. Steven looked out the window at the neighborhood. Kids playing on the sidewalk, families walking together, people laughing and smiling. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I've been all over the world, he finally said. Worked with governments, trained soldiers, dealt with dangerous people. And you know what I've learned? Rosa leaned in, listening. The most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon or a criminal organization. It's silence. Good people staying quiet when bad things happen. He turned back to her, his expression serious but warm. You didn't stay quiet, Rosa, you could have. But you people would have. Rosa's eyes filled with tears again. I was so scared. I know, Steven said gently. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is, not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. He took a sip of his coffee. You reminded me why I do what I do. Why any of it matters. Rosa wiped her eyes and laughed softly, a little embarrassed. Well, your coffee's on the house. Forever? Steven smiled, a real, genuine smile. Deal. Just then, a little girl ran up to the booth, clutching a crayon drawing. Excuse me, mister, she said shyly. Are you the man who helped Miss Rosa? Steven looked at the drawing, a stick figure version of himself standing next to Rosa in front of the diner. I guess I am, he said. The little girl handed him the drawing. Thank you. My mama says you're a hero. Steven took the drawing carefully, holding it like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Your mama's very kind. But the real hero is Miss Rosa. He glanced at Rosa, who was now crying openly. The little girl smiled, then ran back to her mother. Steven folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Rosa finally found her voice. You're welcome here anytime, Mr. Seagal. Anytime. I'll remember that, Steven said, standing up. He placed a $50 bill on the table, far more than the coffee cost. Keep the change. For the next person who needs a little help. And with that, he walked out quietly, disappearing into the crowd. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're shaking inside. Rosa didn't have money, didn't have power, didn't have connections or protection. But she had something stronger than all of that: self-respect. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Tony Marcello learned that the hard way. He's now serving 15 years in federal prison. No parole, no early release. His empire dismantled piece by piece, his properties seized. His associates arrested or scattered his name. Forgotten by most, a cautionary tale for the rest. But Rosa's diner, still standing, still serving, still proving every single day that kindness, dignity, and courage will always outlast cruelty. The neighborhood rallied around Rosa after the reopening. Business was better than ever. Customers came not just for the food, but for the story, for the hope. Because Rosa's story wasn't just about one woman standing up to a gangster. It was about what happens when we refuse to be silenced. When we refuse to let fear control us. When we choose dignity over safety. And it was about what happens when good people, like Steven Seagal, decide to stand with those who stand alone. Steven could have stayed in his corner booth that night. Could have finished his coffee and walked out before things escalated. Nobody would have blamed him. But he didn't. Because true strength isn't loud. It doesn't brag, it doesn't threaten or intimidate. It just stands firm, no matter who's watching, no matter what the cost. Rosa still runs her diner today. She hired 3 new staff members, all from the neighborhood, all people who needed a second chance. She hung the drawing from that little girl on the wall behind the counter, right next to a photo of her and Steven taken on reopening day. And every morning, when she unlocks the door and turns on the lights, she remembers that night. The night she crushed that cigar. The night she said, "Man, don't dare me." The night everything changed. She doesn't regret it. Not for a second. Because standing up for yourself, even when it's scary, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it. Always. The world needs more people like Rosa. People who refuse to be pushed around. People who choose respect over fear. And the world needs more people like Steven. People who use their power not to dominate, but to protect. Not to intimidate, but to uplift. If this story taught us anything, it's this. Respect isn't something you show only to the rich or the powerful. It's something you show to everyone, especially when you think no one's watching. Because one day, the person you look down on might be the one you end up looking up to. And the person sitting quietly in the corner, they might just be the one who changes everything. True power is silent. True respect is earned. True courage is acting even when you're afraid. Type RESPT if you believe humility and bravery go hand in hand. Tell us in the comments which part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it Rosa crushing that cigar and saying, "Man, don't dare me"? Was it Steven stepping in and taking down 3 bodyguards in seconds? Was it the FBI twist when Angela revealed they'd been building a case all along? Or was it the reopening, when the neighborhood came together and celebrated Rosa's courage? Let us know. We read every single comment. We've got more incredible stories coming your way, stories of courage, justice, everyday heroes, and moments that restore your faith in humanity. Stories about people who refused to stay silent, who stood up when it mattered most, who proved that one person really can make a difference. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for the next one. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment, they're reminders. Reminders that good still exists, that courage still matters, that standing up for what's right is never a mistake. See you in the next video. Stay strong, stay kind, and never ever let anyone make you feel small. A much love to all of you watching. You're the real heroes.